Good afternoon, everybody. This is Mr. Verzat, and today what we're going to talk about is pre-drawing. What the heck is it? Pre-drawing. Well, I'll tell you what it is up front. It's the most important technique I'm ever going to teach you. It's something that you'll use now, that you'll use midway through the semester, at the end of the semester, into next semester, and even when you paint. And if you decide to go on to Design 2 or any other advanced classes, you'll use it then too. Basically, it's the foundation that my house is built on. This is an example of pre-drawing. This is a character that I was hired to draw, and I took some pictures of it while I was in the middle of production. So this is a piece where you can, see there's a whole bunch of loose, sketchy lines, and also some crisp, dark, bold, tight lines. So yeah, just take a second to look at that. I can see a couple of things about it that are kind of unique. There's a whole bunch of different shapes inside of it, a bunch of ovals. Let's take a look at that left arm over there. The arm that's on the left. It's basically just basic shapes, ovals and such. And then we've got some blade-like triangular shapes coming off of it. That could be, a triangle or something. The legs, same thing, just ovals stacked on top of each other. And the ovals are changed a little bit to be what we call a basic or general form. A general form. Another term that we could use is maybe basic shape, like triangle, square, and circle. The purpose of pre-drawing, let's just look at it really quick, break down the word. If you break down the word, it says pre-drawing. Pre means before, and drawing means to draw forth or to bring into being from your imagination using an art tool. So to pre-draw means you draw before you draw. All right? So a couple of other facts and characteristics. What is it technically? Well, it's a rough drawing, usually in basic or general shapes, serving as a foundational layout for the actual finished piece. So think of a house and that big sturdy foundation that it sits on top of. Pre-drawing is your foundation that your drawing rests on. So what kind of line work does it use? You can see a lot of different looking line work here. It's characterized by light, loose, and sketchy line work. And as you saw in previous videos, sketchy means that you just draw over it more than once. So if you were to draw a circle that was not sketchy, it would be one solid line. If you drew a sketchy line, it would be light, it would be very loose, and you would have drawn over the same area more than once. It's just a body mechanic that helps you get better at what you're doing. Think of it as shooting a basket, except you're doing it like 5 times a second instead of like shooting the basket once, running and getting the ball, shooting it another time. When you sketch, you're training your arm to be a lot better and more accurate at what it's doing. So that is what sketchiness is. There's a time for sketchiness and a time for tight line work. Okay? So moving right along, here's the other weird thing about pre-drawing that you probably never heard about. It's meant to go away. It's meant to disappear. And in the end, the way it disappears is by either shading it out or erasing any leftover lines during touch-up. You either shade it out or erase any leftover lines during the touch-up stage. That means that your lines need to be very, very light. If your pre-drawing lines were very bold and you had to go shade a very light area, you'd still see your pre-drawing lines. We don't want that. It has to be very light. So practice using your arm like a feather. Here's the other cool thing about pre-drawing. It enables you to draw still life accurately. Still life means you're drawing something in front of you, like a flower or a Hot Wheels car or a glass or anything, something that's in front of you, that's 3D and it's still. So it helps you to draw things accurately. We'll get into how that works in a little bit. Now here's the big reason why I teach it to you. It's great that it's a drawing that is before a drawing. It's great that it's a layout, like a blueprint. It's great that it helps you to draw things accurately. The reason I teach it to you is because it's how you create original work that no one's ever seen before. If you create an original animal or creature, if you know how to build it out of basic shapes, that's the stepping block into making something unique, and that's our goal. And the last piece about pre-drawing is what kind of pencil hold do you use? Well, naturally, if you want light, loose, and sketchy lines, you would use an overhand pencil hold to see where you're drawing at. Overhand hold, helps you see where you're going. If you're pre-drawing, you're working loose and very general. You want a blueprint, so naturally, you need to see where you're going to do that. So let's take a look at some examples of pre-drawing here. Take a look in the lower left over here. This is an example of a pre-drawing line. It's tight. I mean, it's not tight, but it is controlled. Okay, so these are just basic ovals that I stacked and built on top of each other. A couple of triangles near the ears over here. This is kind of a lop-eared bunny rabbit. This is what I would draw first before I do the actual drawing. And it's light and it's loose. The three ovals up next to the rabbit's head that look kind of like part of a brick wall, you'll see what that's going to eventually be. But anything can be drawn by pre-drawing. All right, non-examples. Let's start with those pair of lips. Look at the line work on that. Tight, bold, detailed, crisp. That's actually what those three ovals are. That's an example of showing you how when we get into portraiture, drawing people's faces, that's how you can draw different body parts, by pre-drawing them out. So you can draw the mouth by stacking three ovals on top of each other. Just a little flash forward there for you guys. And then over here is just a finished drawing of a lop-eared bunny rabbit. And as you can see, that's a non-example. The line work is tight, it's crisp, and it's finished. Very few people can do this. If you learn how to pre-draw first, your work is going to be far more competent, far more professional looking, because you'll have drawn with precision and control. Just, you start with something loose, you draw on top of it, there you go. And finally, the last interesting bit of it, saves your mind energy. Seriously, if I were to draw this robot armor picture in the middle from scratch, just from the beginning, just draw all those intricate parts, it would be insanely difficult. If you have something roughed out first, you've basically saved your brain all the work in figuring out where to put everything. Now all you have to do is work on detail, and your piece is going to be a lot stronger. So here's an example of a pear. Basically all it is, two circles stacked on top of each other. We've got a couple of different line work examples going on here. Well, what you do for the pear, or for any fruit for that matter, break it down into basic shapes. See what shapes you can pull out of it. In this case, I found two shapes, two circles, stacked them on top of each other, used them to help me draw the pear. Saved me a lot of work and a lot of mental energy. So here's an example of the basic step-by-step use of pre-drawing if you're going to look at a picture or use a reference. So if you take a look over here at this rabbit, if I were to look at that, I would have that picture out, and on a separate sheet of paper, the actual piece of paper that I'd be drawing on, I would first of all start turning it into basic shapes. Now we're not going to go into detail as far as placement of those shapes. This is just an example of the progression, the steps that you take when you draw. And then it's light, your circles and your shapes are all light and loose, and then if you look on the very, very far right, this is an example of the drawing when it's all finished. And notice you cannot see any of those pre-drawing lines. They were either shaded out or erased. That's the goal. So, just an example of how drawing works. Okay, let's take a look and see how to basically just pull basic shapes out. Well, the general rule of thumb is that when you go to look at a picture and you try to draw what you see, what you do is you look for the most in-your-face and obvious basic shape, and it has to be the biggest one too. And when you look for that biggest one, try to find the biggest one that everything else is attached to. Makes it a whole lot easier for you to do it. So looking at this buck right here, I'm looking at his body, and I see a very boxy shape. You could do an oval if you want. Hey, that's cool. Me, I'm just for the heck of it, I'm just going to kind of sketch in a rectangular type shape. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a foundation to put all your drawings on. Next, I can go in here for the legs. You got to remember when you do it though, make sure you connect everything to it. You can do a couple different things. I might look at these shoulder blade areas here, and draw an oval. I might see a triangle right here too for the leg. Same thing over here. He's got these side haunches, and what I see is kind of a an oval type shape, and then maybe a triangular type shape over here. Right? It's okay to have your shapes overlap. It's perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, it helps you understand your form a little bit better. As a matter of fact, with most deer type animals like elk, deer, antelope, horses, they all have these kind of really thin type legs, and triangles I've found usually work very well. Right over here, we've got his head. What's his head attached to? Well, you can do an oval, you can do a triangle. It's entirely up to you. You can do a triangle or even ovals there. I'll just skip over the antlers. So that's just kind of how you do it. Let's take a look at this lion over here. He's a little bit different because no longer is he is our picture here standing broadside looking at us flat. like a sticker. Now he's walking straight at us. He's in 3D. So here's what you do if you're drawing something 3D. Once again, find the biggest and most in-your-face obvious shape. You know, it could be like a jelly bean kind of shape right here for his body. You could start with the head. It's entirely up to you. Just for the heck of it, I'm gonna go for the body that everything's built on. All right. He's also got kind of a, his rear end over here. I'm going to throw that in there too. Let's look at his head. When you draw something that's coming right at you, you need to have them stacked on top of each other. All of your shapes need to be stacked on top of each other, kind of like a sandwich. So when you draw, the way you do that is you draw through whatever you draw, kind of like as if it were a ghost. So I'm just pulling out the shapes. I'm drawing through everything. I'm overlapping what I'm drawing. That gives it depth, three-dimensional form. We've got even more going on with his mane over here. Let's finish the rest of that off too. The reason I did two separate shapes for the mane was because he's got this puffy part right here first, and then he's got another part of his mane behind that. So I'm just overlapping all of my forms. Let's do this one down here on the bottom, his leg. And you can just do an oval there if you want. He's got a limb over here. Got kind of a triangular looking shape over here. Well, that's really all there is to it. One thing you can do to practice is maybe take a piece of printer paper, go find some photos of some animals, people, things, objects, built machines, and try not to copy what you got. Put that piece of paper over the top of what you're doing and try to pull out the basic shapes of it. Learn how to do that. That's a great way to work on it. Now the goal isn't to become a photocopier again. The goal is to learn how to do this and make your own work. I guarantee you, if you drew a whole bunch of lions and you made them out of basic shapes like this, $50 says that eventually you would get so familiar with like how big the lion's head is compared to his body that you could probably build a lion without looking at a picture eventually. That's what we call studying our form. If we study horses by turning them into basic shapes, we can recreate horses without looking at them. So, moving right along, here's an example of creating original work. This is Dopey. He's a character from Snow White. If you look at Dopey, this guy, what did the artists have to look at? There was nobody. Dopey doesn't exist. He didn't exist until back when the first Disney cartoon was made. They built him. He's an original creation. So Dopey, if you look at him, he's got a head which looks like a basketball, and he's got a body which looks like an oval, and his rear end or his waist looks like another basketball. His hands look like ovals. His hat is kind of a triangle-looking thing. Very basic. And this is what they used when they were figuring out how he looked. And once they figured out how big his basketball head was compared to his body, then they'd send him off to a bunch of other animators who could use that, and all the other animators would draw him the same, and he'd look the same because he was built from the ground up. So here's an example of an original work that I was working on. This is a piece that's in mid-production, and this is an example of a pre-drawing that's being finished up using ink. So basically, with this guy, I didn't look at any pictures really besides 3 tiger heads. And the purpose of looking at those 3 different heads was to get different angles of a tiger and see what that face looks like, how big the cheeks are, what's the nose look like. Because I don't know about you, I wasn't born knowing what a tiger looks like. So I needed to use that reference, and I didn't copy any of those pictures. As a matter of fact, none of those pictures look anything like this drawing. I just used those pictures to help me. And let's take a look at the head, for example. I looked at the tiger head and thought, okay, so it's a big oval in the middle, all right? And the nose is kind of triangular, and he's got triangular ears. And where do those pieces sit next to each other? And so I used that to help build it from the ground up. Let's look at this guy's body. If you look at his shoulder over here, right smack in this area, you've got looks like an oval, right? Well, when you draw in complex forms, and this is like an art too, but just helps to show you guys, it helps to build things from the ground up. And the same thing for the hands. If you look at his fist right over here, I had no idea what his hand pose was going to be like. I just kind of roughed it out as a circle and then made the decision later. Let's look at his other hand here where he's got his claws out. Same exact thing down to every single finger joint. It's pre-drawn out using basic shapes. Look at his legs. They're just ovals, big stretched out egg shapes stacked on top of each other to make different shapes. So that's an example of how pre-drawing works. Then you draw over the top of that and get rid of it, and in the end have a finished piece. So that is basically that. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Just kind of an introductory look. We're going to look a little more in depth in the future as to how to know how big to make your shapes, how to make your picture look exactly like what you're looking at, and eventually how to create unique, original work. So I look forward to seeing you guys in class, and have a great day.